ja mogu bez mikrofona govoriti, ja mislim da me se dovoljno dobro čuje, a onda će naši gosti tu na mikrofone govoriti, oni su pristojniji od mene, pa su tiši. Ja ću se prebaciti na engleski, ja sam Miljenka Buljević i organiziram reviju malih književnosti u Booksini zadnjih, ne znam, 17, 18, 19 godina, od 2005. pa zbrajajte. I zajedno sa Sjónom sam uredila antologiju suvremene islandske književnosti. Sad ću preći na engleski, radi naših gostiju. Everybody, welcome to the opening of the Review of Small Literatures, our festival that started in 2005 and that we are extremely proud of. It's in 2015 when I first met Sjón, actually when the no, I just said that I'm loud enough and indecent enough to yell. Thank you. Okay. And in 2015, Sjón and I met for the first time, and that's when the germ of this festival was started. Sjón was giving a lecture on small languages, and one thing struck me from his speech. He said, a language is not small if it can read Shakespeare in its own language. So if Shakespeare can be translated into that language, and I really like that because this festival is probably the smallest literary festival in the world. We present writers that are completely unknown in Croatia, and we this year present 12 writers from Iceland, not previously translated into Croatian. 10 of them came to Zagreb. We are extremely proud that we have 10 writers from Iceland. And tonight, tomorrow, and on Thursday evening, we will be talking to them, listening to their readings, and of course, reading their texts in the anthology that we published in collaboration with Sjón. Sjón made a selection, and he will talk about literary scene in this small country which has 10 times less people than Croatia, but reads probably 10 times more than people in Croatia. So that would be really interesting to hear. And Luka Ostojić, our former editor-in-chief and our decade-long associate, will talk to Sjón and to other two guests, writers from Iceland, who will be presented by Luka here. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Mika. Now I feel old. Well, anyway, I'm Luka. I read books sometimes, and I like Iceland, so that's why they call me here. But sitting with me is Sjón, a writer of prose, poetry, librettos, film scripts, lyrics, basically everything that you can write, Sjón writes it. And I think that most of the things that came to Iceland that you're familiar with, Sjón was involved in some way with that. So it's not really a miracle that you are the one who selected the writers from Iceland that we will present in this anthology and this festival. So Sjón, nice to have you back here in Zagreb.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be back in Zagreb and to be back in Booksina.
Yeah.
Because I've been here before. And I was so glad when Mika got in touch and said that you had decided to choose Iceland for the festival. And that was an opportunity to come again to Booksina and to be a part of what Booksina does.
Great. So Iceland is not really a big country. It has around 350,000 people, but one unnamed source from Iceland told me that that in every family there's a poet in Iceland. So is that true? Is the writing and reading in Iceland so so widely spread?
Let me correct two things. We are probably 360,000. And climbing, it will probably be 360,900 soon.
I stand corrected.
And also, in every family, there is not a poet, there are poets. And that's the problem. We are all writing and all creating. So literature is something that's been with this small community of people that speak the same language for centuries. For a long while, this was a rather poor nation at the edge of the civilized world, as we say. And the only thing, cultural activity that survived through the ages was literature in one form or another. And actually, surprisingly early, the Icelanders start writing. So from the late 12th century, and especially in the 13th, 14th century, there was a great literary activity on this small island. And that is the gold reserve we built on, as I usually say. That is what we built on. That's where we get our courage from. But literature has, of course, changed over the centuries and is going through big changes in the last years now. But there are poets in every family. Okay,
good to know. But since you are only one person, how do you manage to read so many poets? Do you manage? How do you, as a reader, what does Iceland give you?
Well, I cannot claim to read every poet that is published in the country. I would read all the poets in my extended family, though. But at the same time, you know that there is a strong literary activity in Iceland. I think the literary community is not that large that you lose people, and simply by visiting the main bookstores in Reykjavik, you can get an overview of what is going on. Even though we have a long and strong tradition of self-publishing and small publishers, small presses, poet-run presses and things like that, you can more or less get an overview of what is going on by being a regular to a bookstore, which everybody should be, of course.
Great. So you mentioned the contemporary scene that's running through some changes, and well, I'm almost ashamed to say that we associate Iceland with Vikings, with volcanoes, with sweaters, with björk. So, but can you give us a more correct picture of the contemporary writing scene, literary scene?
Well, I think all of the things that you mentioned, they are there, and Vikings are part of our history, and björk is a part of our contemporary cultural history, and people still knit sweaters and foreigners buy them. And what was then there's the volcano, which has actually been active quite recently. So all of these things are there to be enjoyed on one level or another. But because we're talking about literature, and I said that things are changing, so we've been writing in this language and composing literature in this language for centuries now, and it's really ingrained in our idea about who we are and what we are. And I think we are proud to see ourselves as people. I really don't like to use the word nation very much, because the word nation has been abused by all the wrong people for too long. So I like to talk about people and culture. And I think we are quite proud that our culture puts so much importance on literature and on the composed text. One thing that's been changing in the last, I would say, 10, 15 years is that Icelandic literature is becoming a literature of different languages, various languages now for the first time. People are moving to Iceland, and in the last 30 years, more and more people have been moving to Iceland from various countries, various cultures. And we are very happy that recently these people have been stepping forward and becoming a part of our literature. And for example, here at this festival we have two authors. We have Elías Knörr, who is from Galicia, and he writes in Galician and also in Icelandic. And then we have Ewa Marcinek from Poland, who is part of the flourishing Polish literary scene in Iceland. It's really amazing that we now have a pocket within our literature that consists of Polish writers. It's very exciting. And this will change Icelandic literature, and I'm very excited about it. One of the reasons I think Icelandic literature has survived so well through the ages is that we've always had people who have been open to influences, outside influences. So what even the national poets of the 19th century wrote and contributed to our self-image, to our courage of staying on this damned rock in the North Atlantic. Even they, who were digging into the national heritage of literature and history, they only did it by adopting what was going on in literature abroad. So they were very well versed in the romantic, what was going on with the romantic poetry on the mainland, especially German poetry. But they took the influence of this poetry, they took different literary formats, and they used them to renew what is possible in the Icelandic language. And you can say that the Icelandic sagas from the 13th century, that they were only possible because few different literatures and cultures came together. It was the Nordic culture that was brought there by people from Norway, Denmark, and it was the Celtic culture coming from Ireland, because a big part of the population was from Ireland, or from the islands, the Hebrides and Orkney and the Shetlands. So even so early, our literature is made up of many different strands. The greatest poet from time poets is possibly Hallgrímur Pétursson, a Lutheran priest and a bit of a troublemaker. And his poetry, which is considered the most beautiful poetry written in his age, was only possible because he embraced the Baroque, you know. So Icelandic literature is never good except when it's embracing foreign influences. So that goes against the nationalist narrative, I'm happy to say. And now we are so lucky that people are actually coming to us with their literature and producing new amazing literature from inside our literature. So that is the big news.
That's great news. So tell me about this exciting selection. How did you? It's a very wide group of people. You know, they belong to different generations. They write different styles. How did you select these people? So
it was quite interesting to me how this festival is constructed. Because usually when authors are invited to places, it is because they already have a book published in that language or in that place. And here the first requirement was they cannot have been published before in Croatian, and I thought, that's interesting. And then there was a requirement that I would look more to the younger generation and people who were like in their, like, you know, mid-career, and of course that it would give like a good overview of what was going on in Iceland. And when I started looking at the lists of people who had already been invited in earlier editions of the festival, I saw that, okay, there was one older one here and there, and I asked Mika, I said, okay, if I sneak in one like, you know, my age, or maybe one even older than that, and he said, yeah, but not, maybe only two. So what I did was that I tried to look for people who have distinctive voices, who represent different strands of Icelandic literature, who are of different generations, and at the same time they are all writers who have been recognized in one way or another in Iceland already.
Mm-hmm.
Nominated to prizes, they've received prizes, they've been recognized as people who are contributing to our literature. And I don't know if I should go through the whole list of people, you know, but I've already mentioned Elias and Eva, who represent the new strand of Icelandic literature made by people of other languages and other origin. The grandmaster of Icelandic literature, Guðbergur Bergsson, is represented here in the anthology with poems. He is first and foremost our greatest living prosa writers, I can say. Guðbergur will turn 90 years old this year. Mm-hmm. And he revolutionized Icelandic literature in the 60s. He wrote a large novel called Tómas Jónsson Bestseller, where he took everything ever written in Icelandic and turned it against itself. And it's a magnificent book, and I've always said that it's impossible to escape this book. If you're a contemporary Icelandic writer, you have to take a stance against it or with it. And it's one of those amazing books that at the same time it opened all the doors, it made it incredibly difficult to follow, you know. Mm-hmm. So because, you know, he obviously goes through all the doors at the same time. You know, most of us can only go through one door at a time, you know, but that's the trick he asks you to learn. So I'm very glad that Guðbergur is in the anthology. And he's represented by poetry, which is quite rare. Mm-hmm. He's very proud of his poetry. He publishes very little poetry, but he's very proud of his poetry. And it gives you the essence, of course. And the writers who will be here tonight, Elías Knörr and Ragnar Helgi Ólafsson, I mean, what they have in common is that they are very much, they are both poets, but Ragnar Helgi also writes prose. Elías writes in Icelandic and in Galician, and I think his Galician language is creating patterns and thoughts in the Icelandic language that would only be possible if they by someone who is bringing a completely different literary and linguistic thinking to the Icelandic language. And Elías is also a performer. And Ragnar Helgi is a poet and quite an experimental writer when it comes to prose. He's written short stories, texts that can be shuffled, and then he's written this amazing autobiographical book about his relationship to books and to his father's library, and it's a wonderful multi-layered book that deals with grief, hope, heritage, how to accept what is given to us from the past, how to carry it on, asking the question, do we have to carry it on? What do the things that we as individuals love in life, do they carry on to the next generation? Or there's so many things that are brought into play in that book. Jónas Reynir Gunnarsson is a prosaist and a poet. Quite many of these people write both poetry and prose, because in Iceland we are all so talented that we can do almost everything, you know. And there's a long tradition of doing that, of course. In a small community, you know, you have to compose a poem memorizing someone that is to be read at a funeral tomorrow, and then you go and you have to slaughter a sheep, you know, immediately after you've written that beautiful poem, and then you might have to go to a friend's house and help with the plumbing.
It's true. I noticed that most of these writers are you know, they're not simple writers. They do 5 or 6 different things.
Yeah. Before noon.
Yeah. Before.
Sigrún Pálsdóttir is a historian and a novelist. She started as a historian and started working with historical material and reshaping it into narratives. Bergþóra Snæbjörnsdóttir started as a poet, but she's also worked in performance, and now she's become an incredibly strong voice in prose. Sölvi Björn Sigurðsson, also a poet, who has been really experimental in his novels, in how he chooses the subject matter and what format he chooses for each novel. He got the Icelandic Literary Prize for his second last novel called Salt, which is really a fantastic reimagining of events in the 18th, 19th century and the mind of the people at that time. Brynja Hjálmsdóttir is a poet, a young poet. She's got 3 big books. She's got 3, I think there are 3 books published already. Her last book was a play that is not supposed to be put on stage unless someone wants to do it. She simply wanted to use the format of the play to play with, mm-hmm. and it's a strange, surreal story, and she has been quite experimental in things she's doing, and Ásta Fanney Sigurðardóttir is a visual artist and a poet. And she's, I would say, at the forefront of the exploration of language, where language simply cannot produce images, ideas, where they almost vanish. The possibility of language almost vanishes. So maybe if you come from the visual world and you work in the visual world very much, where things are actually visual, you can enjoy with words entering the world of invisibility. I don't know, that's possible. And the last one I have here in front of me is Kristín Ómarsdóttir. Kristín is born in 1962, like so many great people like myself. And she is the mother. I think Kristín is the mother of so many things that are happening in Icelandic literature today. She started in the 80s writing poetry, and then she moved on to short prose, flash fiction, and she was the pioneer of flash fiction in Icelandic. And then she moved on into the novel. She's also a playwright, and she's had her plays staged in the National Theatre and the City Theatre. And I think I can say that she's completely unique voice. And she was the main reason I asked Mika, is it okay to put someone that's older than, you know, whatever, into the group?
But you're both young, yeah. You are both young, so...
Me and Kristín, yeah. We are the youngest poets here, of course. You know, a poet really doesn't age. Yeah. You know, and maybe that is why so much of us write poetry. It's because we know there is immortality in it, and you don't age. But Kristín, I'm very proud that Kristín is here, and that you will get to know her literature, because she's been breaking. I think people like Kristín, she breaks ground, and she's one of the tool makers of literature. Some people create the tools for the rest of us to use, and she's a tool maker. She's breaking ground with new tools. So that's quite a feat. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Sjón. I would both listen to you now for hours and go home and read a book at the same time, but I can't do either of that. So I thank you, and I would like to call.
Thank you, and enjoy the festival. You will have opportunity to meet all these people I mentioned, and I'm again glad to be a part of it. And And there is nothing small in literature, there's only beauty. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.